The work of a sworn peace officer, which includes those who hold the title of police officer or deputy sheriff, can be a physically demanding and stressful occupation. Along with these demands are high stakes of the profession, where one is asked to risk their own life, and what would otherwise be a situation any other person would be asked to avoid or escape. Increasingly occurring are the demands for peace officers to work long extended hours beyond the common 40 most people work. Contributing to this need is the significant number of peace officers leaving the profession in recent years in the form of early retirement due to declining health of officers who provided service without praise during the pandemic, and civil unrest in recent years, even when it was due to the actions of a very small few who put law enforcement in a negative light. What is often forgotten is that while these average human beings are being asked to do what most people won't do, can't do, or aren't even qualified to do, there's a price being paid on those peace officers every day, both mentally and physically. This price greatly hinders the performance of a peace officer, even when they don't even know it themselves. I'm Lampkin, a law enforcement professional and professional development facilitator. And in this presentation, I will share the need for a mandatory vacation time for law enforcement officers to disconnect from the stresses and fatigue faced in the profession. I will argue not only the ethical efficacies of providing this time off, but to discuss how by doing so, one can prioritize the mental health and overall well-being of law enforcement officers, which can contribute to improved job performance, increased community trust, and the cultivation of a resilient and healthy police force. In recent years, discussions surrounding the need for police reform and improved working conditions have gained momentum. As highlighted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, law enforcement officers are required to exercise a constant state of vigilance as they carry out their shifts. At least in more urban areas, especially those with a high crime rate, peace officers are challenged weekly with responding to what can be very dangerous and stressful incidents. In some of these incidents, police officers are forced to bear witness to the worst of humanity, tending to the violently wounded after being assaulted, or in the worst case, the investigations of someone deceased. In many cases, law enforcement is the first called upon to address societal dilemmas when no other public entity is willing to do so. It is then peace officers are summoned and asked to play the untrained role of psychologist, clinician, teacher, marriage counselor, doctor, social worker, legal guardian, healthcare worker, advocate, and janitor. None of which of these roles are typically listed within the job description of a law enforcement officer's duties, but yet they do it anyway, as the only resource available 24/7, ready to act when called upon. From personal experience, there's been a lot of tragedy witnessed over the years, and I too have been asked to play in every single one of those roles. But the one thing I have never been asked by the public after responding to these challenges is, how are you feeling inside? I mean, most people will experience a handful of critical tragedies in their entire lifetime, and that alone could send someone spiraling out of control. But to experience them weekly, and for some in their careers on a daily basis, when crime is at a peak, well, that can have a heavy toll on anyone when not properly managed. And then within the problem solving and long work hours, there's the unseen dangers of fatigue and lack of opportunities to attend perishable skills training, greatly diminishing the safety of the workers. Whereas in other professions like airline pilots and truck drivers, there exists standardized and regulated work hours. No such structure exists for peace officers. Under that fatigue and stress, peace officers are still expected to mitigate problems involving violent and unreasonable people. In doing so, they are governed by a set of rules that require them to act in the case and manner prescribed by law, even when that person being confronted lives by no rules and becomes violent, prompting an officer to respond with physical efforts to overcome their resistance. Despite getting it right thousands of other times prior to that engagement, if that officer doesn't play by the rules just that one time, they can lose not only their freedom, but their quality of life without any consideration for the demands on their body and mind prior to that incident. And if they don't have the right conditioning, the right mindset in the fight, it could cost them their lives. In my entire career, most of my career was spent working night shifts, and as concluded in related studies, this often resulted in sleep deprivation with disruption to my circadian system as I rotated between daytime and nighttime sleep patterns to accommodate what little time I had for my family and social activities. I've personally never heard of an officer being asked to take a vacation or even take the following day off after enduring a traumatic event, unless they were involved in a shooting. And that's because the organization's policy dictated a number of days be given for that specific reason. In most cases, after mitigating tragedy, it's off to the next call for service, as the practice of time management is spoken of far more than the practice of stress management. With today's staff shortages across the nation, peace officers are being asked to work an additional 48 to 60 hours a month. In studies related to the effects of consistently engaging in high-stress situations, long work hours, and a lack of time off, humans become compromised, both psychologically and physiologically, making them more susceptible to memory and performance impairment. In promoting the need for mandatory vacation time, the political frame introduces the notion that interdependence, divergent interest, scarcity, and power relations generally spawn political activity. Thinking political is also recognized as one of the 6 channels of persuasion, as individuals involved in negotiations try to exert influence over the actions of a larger organization. The political frame helps determine how resources, including staffing levels, are allocated within any law enforcement agency. Budgetary constraints and what the law enforcement agency prioritizes can lead to understaffing, overworking officers having to respond to calls for service with less staff, and inadequate time off for rest periods. Politically driven decisions may prioritize certain aspects of law enforcement over officers' well-being, contributing to fatigue-related issues. Law enforcement agencies are subjected to political pressures from local, county, and state politicians and expectations of the public. Political leaders who are motivated by the need to demonstrate zero tolerance on crime or respond to public demands for justice may push for mandating officers to work longer work hours as a means to provide a higher police presence or faster response time. These external pressures can exacerbate fatigue issues by intensifying workloads and limiting opportunities for officers to recuperate. Existing in law enforcement agencies are police unions, representing the collective interests of the officers. Unions can be significant influencers in encouraging law enforcement agency management to develop policies related to working conditions and mandatory time off. The political frame is introduced into the collective bargaining negotiations, where unions and management may engage in power struggles over issues such as shift rotations and overtime caps to ensure the best possible coverage can be obtained for the community, while providing officers the opportunity to take time off to rehabilitate from the fatigue and stresses of the job. The negotiations between the unions and the agency can directly affect officers' fatigue management. At the deepest level of human motivation lies people's feelings, beliefs, identities, spiritual roots, cultural ties, and life stories. Sharing compelling stories, as I have done, can be a way to appeal to an audience to seek empathy. Specific to law enforcement officers needing time off to recuperate from the stresses and fatigue of the job are the stories of peace officers who have recently been killed in the line of duty or died by suicide. Just in this last 2 months alone of this year, I have lost 7 colleagues due to suicide, and 1 colleague who was ambushed and murdered while simply sitting in their car at a red light. Each of these incidents demonstrate both an extreme risk and psychological impact the job has on peace officers. In all of these instances, one has to wonder if the demands of the job causing fatigue played a role in their demise. People need an overarching dream of an inspiring future. To create an environment where peace officers can see themselves achieving this dream, a transformation of organizational culture to prioritize officer wellness is needed. This involves moving away from a culture that glorifies long work hours and toughness to one that values a balanced and healthy lifestyle. Part of that balance is a guarantee that officers are provided adequate time off to spend time away from work, to engage in activities that are not work-related. Further, leadership should promote an organizational culture that encourages open dialogue about fatigue, mental health, and stress, reducing the stigma associated with seeking support or requesting time off due to being overwhelmed by the stresses of the job. Acknowledging a need for time off can be reaffirmed through leadership commitment. A commitment of leadership to prioritize officers' well-being is a way to build trust and an overall healthy work environment between management and the subordinates challenged with the everyday difficulties of police work. Leadership must articulate a clear vision that recognizes fatigue as a critical issue, emphasizing the importance of a healthy and well-rested workforce. The commitment should be communicated consistently through various channels, reinforcing the organization's dedication to employee wellness. There must also be awareness and education. Developing a vision and strategy should include educational opportunities and procedures that raises awareness about the physiological and psychological impact of employee burnout. Both law enforcement officers and their supervisors should be reminded of the importance of proper rest, be provided with information related to the signs of fatigue, and know the long-term consequences it can have on job performance and mental health. Considering the amount of trauma, unpredictable work hours, and critical thinking a peace officer endures, providing mandatory vacation for them is not just a humane and ethical consideration. It is also a strategic investment in the effectiveness and sustainability of every law enforcement agency. Acknowledging the demands of the law enforcement profession and prioritizing mental health and well-being of officers contributes to the improved performance, enhanced community relations, and the development of a resilient and dedicated police force. As society continues to scrutinize and demand positive changes in policing, recognizing the importance of vacation time becomes a pivotal step in creating a law enforcement culture that is efficient and compassionate to the needs and desires of the community it serves. Advocating for and implementing policies that support the mental health of police officers can contribute to a safer, more resilient, and trustworthy community.